So Jesus says, I want to come and lighten the load. Those expectations that are bringing burden to your life, guess what? I want to come and I want to lighten that a little bit. I want to take some of those burdens off your plate. He says, hey, if you're tired, come to me. Learn how I do life. Find rest for your soul. The expectations and those burdens, they drag on and they get you. You can feel it in your soul of like, I am exhausted. I can't do this anymore. Jesus desires to come alongside you in that place and lighten the load. All right, so we've been going through this series on marriage, right, for the last couple weeks. Okay, and we believe that this is really important because strong communities are built by strong churches are built by strong families, and strong families are built by strong marriages, right? And so if the enemy can take down a marriage, he can take down an entire community. So the goal here is to create strong marriages. In the last couple weeks, okay, the first one, we did a brief overview of marriage and what it is, what it means biblically. And then last week, Pastor Zach talked about singles and dating and what that phase of life looks like. Today, we're addressing the next one. Okay, it's a little bit more niche, but we're gonna expand it a little bit. Young, married, and expecting. That's me. I'm that. Before I say anything else about this, okay, I will acknowledge the elephant in the room. I am the least qualified to talk about this because I am this, but I'm also the most qualified because I am this. So everything that I say today is not from experience of like, I've walked through this and let me tell you how I got through it. No, this is yesterday for me. This is exactly what I'm going through as we speak. This is my personal life, okay? And this message, I would say, is for people even outside of that, okay? If you are newlyweds in the first couple years of your marriage, if you are engaged and soon to be married, if you are expecting your first child, or if you're raising your first child, I think that this message applies to you. You are in that season of utter chaos. It is utter chaos, okay? And so here's the thing. For me, all right, it went by very quickly. I don't know if it went by super fast for everybody else, but yes, I'm 20 years old, all right? I'm 20 years old. Maddie and I will have been married 6 months on Tuesday. Yes. And our firstborn is due in July, okay? So it was like bam, 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 very quickly, very overwhelming, a lot of things happening, okay? So our story, a little bit where we're at, okay? Just to further explain how fast this all happened. We met at 18, okay? Engaged at 19, okay? And if you asked us what the timeline was on like when we first started dating and stuff, we would not be able to tell you because that's how fast it happened. Like it happened, like first classes hadn't even started yet and we were already out on a couple dates and we're like, oh my gosh, yeah, we're dating. Ah. But we'd known each other for like a couple days. It was like very quick, okay? Engaged at 19, married at 20, and then our baby will be born when we're both 21, okay? I'm turning 21 in April. It has been extremely fast, extremely stressful. It's been overwhelming oftentimes, and honestly, it has been just utterly insane. Insane. If you told me a couple years ago that this is where I was going to be, I would have been like, you're insane. I hope not. I would have been like, that's really scary. That's terrifying. And I get that most people don't have that story. Okay, a lot of people don't go that fast and don't have that fast of a journey. But like I said before, I do think that there is something that anybody can resonate with for this season. Okay, it's a season of chaos, uncertainty, fear, and joy, sometimes at the same time, which is super confusing and overwhelming. And I think a huge part of the burdens that we face come down to titles and expectations. They come down to identity. Okay, think about it. Continue to use myself as an example, right? 2 years ago, before all of this all really went down, okay, I was just Nick. I was a college freshman. I had never left California for more than 2 weeks. You know, I was a follower of Jesus, kinda. I had a girlfriend of 5 months. It was like, it's getting pretty serious. This is cool, like, awesome. I couldn't find Indiana on the map. If you put a blank map of the United States in front of me, you'd be like, hey, where's Indiana? I would have probably pointed to like Ohio or Iowa or something. Like, well, I was like, it's one of the flyovers, right? One of these guys. I'm not kidding you when I say this. A couple months ago, I'm just going to say it. It's really embarrassing. We were in a meeting, in a staff meeting, and Luke was like see, ministry is a lot like silos. And I was like, what the heck is a silo? And why are all these people like totally on the same page as him? But I'm like, you're just drawing circles, man. That's a circle. I don't know what a silo is. I don't know what you're talking about. I was so embarrassed. He's like, oh, California boy doesn't know what a silo is. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what a silo is. Okay, and so I don't know anything about anything other than California, okay? Because when you're in California, all you think about is California, right? Okay, but a year later, after all of those identities, now I'm a fiance. And then another year later, here I am. I'm a husband, follower of Jesus, leader, youth pastor, now father-to-be. And guess what? I'm still a college student. I still have homework. It's the worst. Somehow I have all these like big responsibilities, adult responsibilities, and I'm like, yeah, but I have homework, that I don't do, and I should do. Okay, so out of nowhere, as a college student, I have all of these new titles. The friends that I had in college, guess what? They're still in the dorms. And somehow I have leapt to this new position, this new overwhelming place of life. Okay? And I have all of these titles. And I believe that titles come with expectations, okay? So if you have the title of mother or father, you're expected to be that, I would hope. You are expected to be that. If you are in a company, if you're president, CEO, manager, whatever it is, we all have titles. And each title comes with expectations and responsibilities to fulfill that role. Okay, and I believe that titles bring expectations, and expectations bring burdens. Okay, titles come with expectations, and those expectations bring burdens to our life. At first, it might be exciting, but then eventually we're like, everybody expects me to be this. Everybody expects me to be something, and suddenly you have so many expectations, so many roles to fill, so many responsibilities that you just are juggling everything. Okay, and all of these things, especially for this season of life, the young married expecting phase, there's dozens of titles being thrown at you at a very rapid pace, and so it's so stressful and so exhausting. It's hard to take it all in. Okay, and I believe that seasons of change and transition are already hard enough. Can anybody agree with that? Like, seasons of change, if you need a new job, whatever it is, seasons of change and transition are difficult. If that's anything that we learned in the last 2 years with COVID, change is hard. Change is hard, okay? And so being in this phase of life is no different. It's exhausting, and it's kind of scary. Maddie and I were talking about all of this at home, and I wrote it down, what she said. It was so good. She said, in a season like this, the fearful question that runs through our head is this: how can I serve the kingdom when I can't even keep my own life together? How can I raise and take care of a child when I can barely do the things that I currently have on my plate? You see, we're looking at this pile of stuff, and we're asking, I can barely do the stuff I have now. How am I supposed to do that too? If you're asking that kind of question, if you're wondering how you're going to fulfill all of your responsibilities and expectations, if you're wondering how you're going to afford to live and how you're going to afford to support another human being, whatever it is that you are looking towards and terrified of, there's two things that I want to say to you this morning. One, you're not alone. You are in like-minded company around you. You are well surrounded with people that either are going through it or have gone through it before and want to come alongside you. Okay, we are well surrounded by community. Number two, Jesus wants to come alongside you. Jesus wants to come alongside you. He doesn't want to just leave you in the dust. He wants to come alongside you. See, there's this idea that the expectations and the burdens that we have and all these responsibilities, there's this idea, this myth that only we can take those on, right? I mean, think about it. If you are a father, you think that only you can be the father, right? You're like, okay, I have to do this. This is something that I have to do. But you know what Jesus says to you? He's like, no, actually, I can help you. You don't have to do it by yourself. He says in Matthew 11:28, I love this verse. You've probably heard it before. Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. And you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Last week, Zach kind of explained this a little bit, but if you weren't here or you don't know what a yoke is, okay, a yoke is a wooden board, okay, that they would put on animals like oxen who were carrying weight. So whether it was a plow or whether it was a wagon of some sorts, so a yoke would basically evenly distribute the weight. Okay, that's what a yoke is. It evenly distributes the weight. Who am I kidding? You guys are all Indiana people. You probably know what a yoke is. Gosh. A yoke evenly distributes the weight so that one animal isn't carrying it all on their own. You know, if one animal had to carry all of this weight, they're not going to make it very far. They're going to get exhausted and they're just going to fall. But if you evenly distribute among two, maybe among three, suddenly it's a way lighter load, right? So Jesus says, I want to come and lighten the load. Those expectations that are bringing burden to your life, guess what? I want to come and I want to lighten that a little bit. I want to take some of those burdens off your plate. He says, hey, if you're tired, come to me. Learn how I do life. Find rest for your soul. The expectations and those burdens, they drag on and they get you. You can feel it in your soul of like, I'm exhausted. I can't do this anymore. Jesus desires to come alongside you in that place and lighten the load. Lighten the load. He wants to change the game completely. He says, I love this part, okay? We've talked about how being a believer is an identity in and of itself, and you'd think that that title would also bring burdens and expectations, but no. Jesus completely flips the game around and is like, instead of burdens, my title is going to give you rest. My title is going to give you peace and joy and comfort. I'm going to take the burdens on myself. So that's where we are today. Okay, that's where we're landing. We're walking into this room where Jesus has an invitation for us to share our burdens with him and to rest in a lightened load. Are you with me? Do we want a lightened load? I definitely do. Okay, our passage that we're going to dig into today is Psalm 46. I believe that this passage strongly shows us 3 steps to navigate through a season of uncertainty, chaos, anxiety, burdens, anything like it. And I know that's a little bit cringy of here's 3 steps, change your life, okay? But I strongly believe, I've read this passage and I was like, this is perfectly split up into 3 sections. There's breaks in the paragraphs. And I felt like the Spirit was just ushering in this moment of like, this is what needs to be said, okay? So let's dive in. Verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. At verse 1, okay, the psalmist, prefaces the whole thing and says, God is filled with strength. God is our refuge and strength, a present help in our times of trouble, a present help. He's right there with us. Which brings us to step 1. After he's made this preface about the whole thing, he goes right into it. Step 1, name your burdens. Name them. Name your burdens. The psalmist names the things that are going wrong, okay? He says, the earth is changing, the mountains are shaking, the waters are crazy rough, and they're roaring and foaming. And what's cool here is that the earth and the mountains, those are obviously symbols of like permanence. Mountains don't just shake. They don't just do that on the norm. You're like walking around, you're like, oh yeah, that mountain's just shaking. Yeah, it does that on Tuesdays, No, mountains don't shake. The earth doesn't just change like crazy. The psalmist is saying that amidst the impossible, amidst everything that is normal being completely flipped upside down, everything is going wrong and not like it's supposed to. And yet, he says God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. And we see that in this season of life, and I think anybody can agree with this for COVID, everything can change like that. Your entire life can be entirely flipped on its head like that. You get the pregnancy test. You get the diagnosis. Whatever it is, suddenly your life is completely different. Parents in the room, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're like, yeah, I had a life, and then I had kids. And then my life just went. Suddenly, kids are everything in my life. Your life just completely goes upside down. But the psalmist says that when that happens, when we're looking at this pile of things coming our way, we can rest in a God who is our refuge and our strength. Even when things are so big and so real and huge, okay? Going back to that last verse of that passage, okay? Though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. Okay, tumult is a really confusing word. I was like, what does that even mean? And I looked at other translations, and other words there are like surging or swelling. So it's almost like talking about the vastness, how big this issue is. Your issues might be massive. They might be really scary. You might be really questioning how you're going to get through it. Maybe your burden is financial. Maybe you don't know how you're going to make ends meet. Maybe it's relational. You and your spouse are fighting because you don't know how you're going to do this, and so it's causing divisions. Maybe you're just trying to figure out how the heck you're going to juggle all the things. Whatever it is, acknowledge it. Write it down if you have to. This step is about naming your burdens. Naming them very clearly, acknowledging that they are big, acknowledging that they are real, because you can't give something to God if you don't acknowledge that it's there in the first place. God's like, give me all your burdens. And if you're like, I have no burdens, and you're like hiding them behind your back, like, how are you supposed to do that? No, you have to acknowledge that they're there. You need to look and say, yeah, this is real. I'm terrified of being a father. Yeah, this is real. I'm terrified of how much stuff I have to do. I'm scared that I might lose my job, or I'm terrified of all of these things. Acknowledge the fears. For me, it is trying to juggle everything. It is trying to do all that. There's too much stuff to carry. So step one is to name those burdens that we're facing. Name them. Write them down if you have to. I'm telling you, name the burdens. Okay? Acknowledge the stress. Acknowledge the legitimate fears that you have. And this is not a bad place to be, okay? Some people will say, no, don't act like it's there. But it's okay. It's not a bad place to be. It's just not the place to end. Okay? This is where we're going to go. Verse 4. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in uproar. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice. The earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. All right, here we have step 2. After we've named our burdens, name your God. Name your God. After we have named and acknowledged all of the struggles in our lives, all the burdens that we are facing, we acknowledge that we serve a God who desires to share them with us. That we serve a God who can take them on. When we can't take them on, God is like, oh, I can do it. See, the psalmist uses this concept of paradise. You know, he says, the streams make glad the city of God. The holy habitation. It's all like Psalm 23. If you know that passage, it's like, you lead me beside quiet waters. You restore my soul, green pastures, all the stuff that makes it just sound so serene. You're like, man, I need a vacation. It's that paradise that expresses the peace, the joy, the calm, the stability that God has. So we see that in the midst of things in our life going awry, the psalmist named his burdens, named the things going wrong, and then he names a God who is stable, a God who is full of peace. Even when everything around crumbles, like in verse 6, when it says the nations are falling apart, the kingdoms are tottering, but God's city remains stable. It shall not be moved. God's city will not be moved. Amen? God's city will not be moved. It may be attacked. You may experience all sorts of suffering and pain and stress and burdens, but God's city will not be moved. Nothing can separate you from God. I'm here to tell you this morning that you might think that your burdens are too much, that your burdens are too much to carry, but I'm telling you right now, God doesn't think so. Paul says in Romans, he says, for I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, depth, nor anything else in all creation, insert your burden here. No thing will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Nothing at all. Not a thing will separate you from Jesus. So just rest in that. Rest in that this morning. You don't have to worry about that anymore. It's just gone. Jesus isn't going anywhere. When you yoke with Jesus, you will not be moved. Nothing will separate you. Because our problems aren't bigger than God. He's not afraid of them. Step 2 is that's what step 2 is all about. It's about taking the burdens that we're terrified of and then acknowledging that God is way bigger than them. Step 1, we're recognizing that our problems are big. Step 2, we're recognizing that God's bigger. God's bigger. God is bigger than the problems that we face. And he is strong enough to share the burden in a way that brings the stability and peace that we see here. A city that does not fall, even in the midst of chaos and even in the midst of everything falling apart, it does not move. We get to now have that stability. He's our present help in our time of weakness. Going on to verse 8. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear, burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. Amen. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Hallelujah. See, in this section of the psalm, we see a God who's a warrior, a strong fighter, but he isn't a warrior who conducts war. He's a warrior that ends them. He doesn't walk in and fight battles. He walks in and ends battles. He just walks in and that was done. He was like, that's it. That's all it takes for him. He's the ultimate peacemaker. But here's the kicker. I know we've seen that verse, be still and know that I am God. We've seen it on Instagram with the nice ocean background, and we're like, I'll just be still. And that's true, and that's good, and that's great. But that's not what he says here. That's not what he says here. He's not saying be still to the city. He's saying be still to the enemy. He's not saying it to the city. He's saying it to the enemy. Let's read it a little bit differently. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow, shatters the spear, burns the shields with fire, and says to them, be still and know that I am God. I am exalted in the nations. I am exalted in the earth. See, God is exerting his authority over your burdens, over the enemy. He's calling them to back off. The Hebrew word for still there, it's the word rapha. Super fun to say, rapha. Rapha can be translated as to be still, but also can be translated to sink, or my favorite, to let go of. To let go of. He looks at the enemy and says, let go of the city. Let go. God isn't doing that to you. God is not calling you to let go of your burdens. I'm telling you right now, God is calling the burdens to let go of you. God is a one who ends wars, who walks into your battle, looks at your burdens in the eye, and says, let go of my child. This is someone who's yoked with me. You can't have them. Your burden is not too much for me. It may be too much for them on their own, but my city will not be moved. He has the authority to do that. He's exalted among the nations, not the burdens. If we exalt our burdens, if we treat our burdens like they're bigger than God, we're just lying to ourselves, aren't we? Because they're not. We need to be reminded that our God is exalted among the nations and exalted in the earth. To put it like this, I thought this is funny. He plays the God card. All right, you know how like your boss might just make a power move and you're like, oh, you're just doing that because you're the boss? Or like moms, it's like, because I said so. I have no good reason other than because I said so. You know, that's what God's doing. The enemy is like coming at you and he's like, I'm God, so leave. I'm in charge. You don't get to have a hold here. So step 3, be still. You're probably like, what? He just said not to be still. He told the enemy to be still. What am I doing? But here's the thing. if God tells the enemy to be still, then we should probably also be still. We should probably take a step back and let God just take care of it. Okay, because if we're too busy trying to fight our burdens that's in front of us, there's this huge pile and we're like, trying to get at it. Now there's no room for God to step in. He's not just going to shove you out of the way. He cares about your freedom more than that. You have to take the step back and say, God, you're right. I'm gonna yoke up with you. I'm gonna share this burden with you. You can take care of it. And I know that's hard for some of us because we like control, even when we're not in control. Sometimes when we're in a season that we can't control, life is just happening to us, we try to grasp onto something that will give us a sense of control, that we're like, at least I can control this, and that's good. But in this scenario, I'm telling you, it's so much better to just let God handle it. It's so much better to give up a little control, share the burdens with Jesus. After we have named our burdens, our fears, our titles, expectations, after we acknowledge our stable and strong God, now we just need to be still and let God do it. Let God be the God that is above our burdens. The season of life, and honestly, the past couple years have been exhausting and overwhelming. In my opinion, I think it feels like, I don't know if anybody relates to this, it feels like there are rocks tied to my chest, just big rocks, boulders. And I'm in this river with a rapid pace, a rapid, current. Yes, a rapid current. You feel like you're just being swept away. You're drowning, trying to hold on to something that will give you some sense of control, some sense of, I'm going to make it out. And God's standing on the shore. He's like, dude, I'm right here. Just reach up, grab my arm. I'm going to pull you out of the water. I even have a little knife here, and I'm going to cut off the rocks. I'm going to take the burdens, and I'm going to hold them for you. You've gone through enough. That's God's invitation this morning. Lately, I have been feeling like life is just happening to me. That is a phrase that I feel like I use every day. I go to bed, I tell this to Maddie, we're in bed, and I'm like, I feel like today just kind of happened to me. I feel like I had all these plans for today, and then it just didn't happen like that at all. The day just went, I was like, the day just gets away from me. And that's hard. I admit that. It's hard to go through that. And I know that it's easier said than done to just share the burdens with Jesus and to just be like, God, yeah, you can take it, because it's not that easy. But in the last week, as I have poured over this passage, as I've thought about what it means for me in my life right now, I can tell you right now, I feel rested just thinking about it. I feel a little bit closer to actually living my life and not letting it, take over my life, take over me. Just thinking about the fact that God is above my problems, that God is above my burdens. I can rest in that. And that's what this morning is. Maddie and I put a lot of thought into how this service would go, the order of it, how everything would lead up to a certain point. We wanted this morning to be a time of rest, a time where we can rest in the lightened burden of Jesus, a lightened load. Instead of leaving our bags at the door, like some people say, we bring them right here to the feet of Jesus. We bring all of our luggage. We bring it all in. We're like, hey, I got this. I name my burden. I name that you are big enough to take it on. And so now I'm just going to step back and let you do it. That's what today is for. To name your burdens, to name your God, and to be still. This is so important because if you and your spouse are not sharing the burden with Jesus, you're not going to make it. You're going to burn out. Maddie and I served at a mission in Kentucky 2 summers ago. Okay, and it was a great experience. I have a very big heart for this mission that we served at, but it was in the height of COVID, and so instead of doing summer camps, we were delivering meals to kids. We delivered up to 2,000 meals every day. 2,000 meals every day. We'd pack the meals in the morning and then drive them out to the same houses 6 days a week for 3 months. I've never been more exhausted in my life. And it wasn't because things were just too hard and the ministry was too hard. No, it was because we weren't sharing what was hard with Jesus. And it's funny that the spring right before that, we were flourishing. We were great. We were sharing the burdens with God just fine. But just suddenly, some things change and we forget. We forget that God is above, right? Some seasons are just different than others. And so we burnt out. By the end, we were like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I'm stressed. I'm exhausted. I don't want to see people. I don't want to do anything. And it's because we hadn't shared anything with God. We were living in our own weakness. But Paul says this in 2 Corinthians. 3 times I appealed to the Lord about this. He's talking about persecution and suffering, that it would leave me. But he said to me, Jesus said, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. So I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. See, in our weakness, we were just sitting and trying to make ourselves strong, but we can't do that. We have to rely on the strength of Jesus. The key in this season to having a strong marriage that builds a strong church and strong community is not being strong. It's not, we'll get through this. No, it's letting Christ's strength work over your weakness. It's accepting the fact that your weakness is God's strength. And couples, you have to do this together. Okay, I'm going to invite Maddie back up on the stage. We have to do this together. Okay, if we truly believe that marriage makes us one flesh, okay, you can't have just half of the flesh in the yoke with Jesus, because then it's not going to work out. You're going to end up burning out still. No, what has to happen is that both people need to be in the yoke with Jesus. Or else you're going to have a weak marriage that creates weak churches and weak communities. And that's not what we want at all. The enemy, if we're relying on our own strength, the enemy will just chew us up and spit us out. Because on our own, we will be moved. But with God, we will not be moved. Like I said before, right before that time in Kentucky, that spring was the healthiest we had ever been in our relationship. And I'm convinced, we talked about this a couple months after, we were like, I think it's just because our spiritual life was so healthy. We were actually sharing stuff with Jesus. We were actually talking to Jesus about all the things. And for once, we actually felt like we were thriving because of that. We were flourishing because we were flourishing with Jesus. Do you see that? Jesus' strength came into our weakness, and we got the peace, the stability, and stuff that all that God wants to offer. We can take the punches of life if Jesus takes them with us. And you might still be thinking, how do we do this? How does that even happen? It happens in prayer. It happens in submission of your things. Honestly, those 3 steps of name your burden, take time to pray and name the burdens in your life, name the God, and then let him take care of it. It's prayer and submission, journaling, allowing your spouse to speak into your problems, and allowing the Spirit of God to also speak into your problems. It's about not doing it by yourself, because you're just going to fall on your face. I mean, anybody that has experienced any trauma or burdens in their life and made it through, the one thing they can say is that, yeah, I couldn't really do it on my own. I needed a support. I needed support. So that's where we are today. As we leave this place, as we worship, as we go about our week, to name our burdens, name our God, and be still in the fact that he'll take care of it.